Hello and welcome. You're watching Business Plus. I'm Shweta Kothari. And in this show, we bring you all the stories related to business policy and economy. With me once again, Suyash Maheshwari here in the studio. Suyash, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Let's quickly run our viewers through how the markets played up this afternoon.
Definitely, Shweta. Now, very interesting day for the markets overall. Now, Indian markets opened mildly positively in the morning session, and Nifty also rescaled the 19,200 sort of levels. However, it touched I think a intraday high of 19,230, which was also the opening sort of levels for the index. After that, in the next hour or so, we saw a steep decline where Nifty gave up around 150 points or so. Then throughout the session, bulls tried to take the markets higher, and even managed to take it higher. By afternoon trade, we had reached at around 19,140 sort of levels, which incidentally was yesterday's close. But from there on, we saw a sharp decline in the last hour of trade, and the index made a low of around 19,056 sort of levels, and then also closed below that 19,100 mark, down about 0.32%. Sensex, on the other hand, also closed down about 0.34%, 0.37% actually, and closed below the 63,900 sort of levels. The action in the broader markets was mixed mostly. Nifty Midcap 100 posted decent gains of about 0.4% or so, but it's still below that 39,000 levels, which according to our experts, the experts that we have been talking to, will be a make or break level for the index going forward. Small cap, on the other hand, which had been resilient throughout last week, and had not really fallen as much as the headliners or the mid caps in the correction that we saw playing out last week, saw some decline. It closed on a flattish note, down about 0.06% at around 12,650 levels. Now, volatility, Shweta, saw a sharp spike today. India VIX was up almost 3% at close, and it settled at around 11.83 levels, but below that 12 mark, which indicates that even though the volatility is currently high, going forward we may see some sort of a decline in volatility overall.
But reaching that 12 mark.
Now, I mean, over the last couple of weeks, in fact, over the last month, we have been tracking three crucial factors. It was a bond yields, it was a crude prices, and it was a dollar index. Now, two factors worked in the favor of the bulls in India, and one factor, which was crude prices, disappointed street. Now, the dollar index eased by around 0.4% or so throughout the session, and it settled at around, I think it is currently hovering around 106, early 106 sort of levels. Bond yields, on the other hand, saw a dip of about 8 to 9 basis points, and the last time I checked, it was currently hovering around the 4.83% sort of levels. Now, crude, on the other hand, which had declined by about 3% or so in yesterday's session, bounced back, and it bounced back by about 1%, but it's around that $88-89 a barrel mark, which has been actually the average price for crude in the last 1 month or so. So overall, from a global standpoint, the cues are rather more or less what they have been in the last month or so.
So in line with expectations, more or less. Let's quickly get in Avinash Gorashakar, who's joining us on the show from Profit Mart Securities. Avinash, thank you very much for taking time out. Good to have you back. Run us through what's working here, in the markets. Lots of volatility throughout the day today. Some of these factors that we are tracking, what other factors apart from this are moving markets? And also, I mean, we can't carry this conversation forward without briefly also touching on FOMC meet, which is currently on in the US. Tomorrow, late into the night, we will be getting, getting to know the takeaways from that meeting. But before that, markets are quite jittery.
Yeah, I think, good afternoon. I think markets are jittery largely because, the FOMC minutes are going to be more important. The commentary from Mr. Powell is going to be more important. If it is a hawkish commentary, again, it obviously would mean that, some comments on inflation would obviously mean how long these interest, rates would continue. At least in the very near term, looking at the Israel-Hamas war, it doesn't look unlikely that interest rates are going to come down in a hurry. US has already stated that their inflation target is 2%, which is still pretty high. I would believe that, in the Indian context, now the markets are getting jittery largely because now November, we are going to see 5 state elections. Yesterday, Jefferies market strategist, Chris Woods mentioned that in case BJP loses even 2 states, that could mean a 25% correction in the market. So I think, markets are now getting jittery on the election side, which is quite obvious. And secondly, crude prices, despite the fact that they have now stabilized, I think any escalation in the war tension between Israel Hamas could obviously escalate crude oil prices, and thereafter, obviously elevate inflation numbers. So I think, clearly these are the kind of data points which the markets are closely observing. I would believe that, now it's going to be more of a stock specific approach. There are many mid-sized companies which have come out with very decent numbers. Some positive surprises in terms of volume growth, in terms of the business commentary. So I think it's going to be a cherry picking exercise for some investors who want to take that risk and buy at these odd levels. But from an index point of view, I would be surprised that the markets would stagnate for some more time here. It's going to be unlikely with such a large amount of FI outflows seen in the markets. Indian investors are going to be in a wait and watch mode. Obviously, some cherry picking would happen, but I think on the broader market, it's going to be a wait and watch. Markets could remain volatile as well as, slightly underperform for some more time.
All right. So stock specific action is where our investors should be keeping an eye on.
Avinash, before we get on to the sectors and stocks that are obviously in focus, you pointed out this Jefferies report that was making rounds, early this morning. Now, I mean, a 25% correction if BJP is, BJP loses the general election going forward. What's your overall assessment? I mean, do you really agree with what Jefferies is saying and what Chris Wood is saying? Because Chris Wood, as we know, traditionally has been very bullish on India.
And, just to add to that, is there also past precedents that you can point to where BJP losing elections has had substantial impact, state elections specifically, has had substantial impact on the markets?
I think my guess is, I think this 25%, fall in the markets is a slightly over pessimistic number, largely because, last time when BJP lost the Karnataka state elections, the markets did not correct that significantly. Now the thinking by Chris Woods is that in case BJP loses two key elections, that is Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, then that could possibly trigger a big, letdown in the markets. I think, his point is partly right. The markets would definitely not like BJP to lose these two crucial states, but a 25% correction, Sujesh, is I think something which is largely very pessimistic. I don't think the markets are ready for this kind of panic sell-off. Considering the kind of SIP money which is also entering the markets, a lot of liquidity enhancement is there in the market which could take care of these kind of falls. So typically, I think it's going to be a wait and watch. So unless these events happen, these are purely statements which the market takes it and obviously reacts on these statements. It's unlikely to happen. My sense is it's going to take a long time. Maybe by the end of November we'll get a clearer picture.
All right. Also, it's important to point out for our viewers that these elections, state elections in 5 states, are a precursor to the national elections. So it will determine mood of the nation, mood of the voters, and that could be one of the reasons why markets, if at all, will take a beating. If BJP loses, that's a big if.
I mean, Shweta, the markets hate uncertainty. It does not, I don't know how much it's, invested in which party wins the elections, but from what I understand, if there is a shift in the political regime, the markets would not like that.
So the balance of power changes.
Yes, but I agree with Avinash over there, 20 to 25% correction, a little pessimistic over here.
Okay, way too pessimistic perhaps, but let's also quickly take a look at some of the sectors that we are tracking.
Certainly. So, auto pack continued to be under pressure for the second straight session. It was the biggest laggard in today's trade, down about 0.67%. Another sector which was down was the Nifty Pharma pack, lost about 0.62% in today's trade. Financial services and banking stocks also saw some bit of a correction. Nifty Bank, which had, was up about 800 points in the last couple of sessions, declined by about 0.45% in today's trade, and it has also slipped below that 43,000 mark, which was, considered a make or break level by a lot of analysts that we were talking to. Apart from that, the PSU banking pack, on the other hand, saw a bit of buying action over there, up about 0.14% or so. Realty was a clear outperformer today. We have seen the demand for housing properties, especially the luxury housing sector, going up, and we have also seen a good bit of run up in a lot of realty stocks. The results have also been largely good, so we are seeing that impact playing out. Nifty Realty pack was up about 1.3% in today's trade.
Realty is a story that's standing out. Avinash, I mean, looking at the growth in realty space, not just the number of luxury homes that are sold, but the realty stocks that have been doing consistently well now. What's your outlook on realty?
I think real estate companies should do better. In fact, most of the numbers which have come out from the larger players like Loda or typically DLF, Oberoi Realty, I think one thing is very clear that inventory sales have been very strong. Pre-sales have been at record highs, and most importantly, despite higher interest rates, inventories have been selling quite well. And most importantly, pockets like Mumbai, Gurgaon, typically these are places where price appreciation has also happened quite significantly. So I would believe that companies like DLF, Oberoi Realty, in North you have got smaller players like Anant Raj, and as Suyash rightly pointed out, luxury sales have picked up significantly. Luxury sales have been high for almost all the key players, and that is something which is going to keep the profitability margins of these real estate players quite elevated. So I think outlook for the next 6 to 12 months looks quite promising. I would not be surprised that there could be a good amount of re-rating even from current levels.
All right.
Now, it reminds me of this article NYT, New York Times had published, a few years back, calling Noida the ghost town of India.
But that's not the case anymore.
Yeah, I mean, 5 to 6% year-on-year rise in property prices. The market clearly had, faced some troubles because of oversupply. But now we are seeing clear demand. I mean, I'm a house owner here in Noida, Shweta. On a daily basis, I get calls from realtors if I'm looking to rent out or sell my property.
Okay.
So clear demand picking up over there in the housing sector.
I'm not sure 5 to 6% is what you're looking at, because reports have suggested that 23 to 30% jump in property prices
and that's
over
across the
years in at least metro cities and specifically Noida and Gurugram. Avinash, it's an interesting story. At one point about 5 to 7 years ago, we used to talk about Greater Noida as the ghost town. Now you have property prices jumping in by as much as 23 to 25%. It's a story of more and more people trying to be a home owner. What's the inventory looking like for real estate players at the moment, and not just luxury, but affordable segment as well?
I think, clearly Gurgaon is one belt where in the last 6 to 8 months, prices have gone up by 30 to 40%. We have been talking to a lot of players here like DLF, Anant Raj, and most of the, commentary which is coming in from these management is that prices are going to stay elevated for some more time. Supplies are definitely less than demand, and I think genuine demand is coming. In fact, not only luxury, plots are selling, luxury houses are selling, villas are selling. But typically, there are a lot of interest for even affordable housing. Like Anant Raj has launched a new affordable housing project. So I think clearly across categories, the demand is strong. And I think this is genuine demand. This is not just investor demand. So my sense is, I think clearly after a lull of almost 10 years in the real estate market, the bounce back has come in. And whenever such bounce back comes in, Shweta, I think at least for the next 2 to 3 years, demand continues to remain elevated. So at least as of now, there are no near-term signs of any saturation, especially in the northern side of the market. In Mumbai also, if you see the numbers of Oberoi Realty, pre-sales have been at record levels. Execution continues to be very rock solid, and there are a lot of new projects which the company has planned. So typically Bombay and Gurgaon are definitely markets which should do well even in future.
So less supply, more demand. Demand continues to rise there, Suyash.
Yes. Avinash, I also want to touch on the FMCG pack. I mean, a lot of consumer staple companies have come out with their Q2 earnings, like the likes of Dabur, HUL, ITC and so on. There's a clear trend that is emerging that we have seen, margin expansion on the back of, softening of commodity prices, especially crude and all. But this has also had an, unintended consequence for these companies, as it has also, marked the re-entry of smaller regional players into the market, which, by the way, as pointed out by HUL, is eating away from their market share. How big of a concern should it be for investors going forward?
No, I think clearly, volume growth and margin improvement are two criteria which, obviously everybody looks at FMCG companies. But I think you're right in saying that in this quarter, most of the company managements have commented that profit margins have come under pressure. Some sort of market share loss has happened because of entry of smaller regional players. So I think, it clearly shows that there are pockets of opportunity for smaller players. The larger players are finding it difficult to generate volume growth, and obviously because of product fatigue or maybe lack of new product launches. But I think clearly the kind of growth which was expected from the rural markets, Suyash, has not yet come in. I think even companies like ITC or for that reason Dabur, Hindustan Lever have commented that the rural market has grown much slower than what they had anticipated. So I think we'll have to wait and watch for the second half. Obviously, the festive quarter looks like should be do well, but hopefully, I think if the volume growth picks up, then I think even if the margin pressure is there, that could make up for the margin loss. But I think we'll have to wait for a couple of quarters to see this trend emerging.
You know, it's interesting you pointed out at the growth of smaller regional players, because Domino's just about a couple of weeks ago cut prices of its pizza by 50% because they were losing market owing to smaller pizza shops appearing in the neighborhood. So it is hurting the business of big players, come to think of it.
But I mean, if you look at the overall India story, it's good, right?
More competition.
More competition, and smaller players are like challenging the likes of, a Domino's or an HUL for that for that market share. So I think it's overall for India, the India story, it's a good news.
Absolutely.
Another sector that I want to touch on, Avinash, is the auto sector. A clear outperformer, through 2023, but we have seen some bit of weakness set in the last few sessions or so. What's the reason for this underperformance, sir?
No, I think clearly, the underperformance is largely for segments like tractors or typically farm equipment, because I think after Mahindra and Mahindra Finance posted its numbers, clearly the commentary from the management was that collections have been pretty slow. And that was the reason, delinquencies had picked up, the profitability had come down significantly. I think broadly, Suresh, if you look at the passenger car market, Maruti came out with a pretty good set of numbers. Commercial vehicles are doing well. So I think the commercial and the passenger car segments are probably places where one could see a stronger growth. Two-wheeler markets are yet are not into the real kind of forceful momentum, because competition is very tough. Most importantly, I would still say that maybe the farm equipment players like Mahindra could possibly face some challenge. So I think it's not that every segment is going to underperform. We are seeing a GDP growth of 6.5%. So typically in these kind of macro scenarios, auto sector is the sector which turns out to deliver the best numbers. So I think it's going to be a little bit of consolidation, and I would expect the third and the fourth quarter should also be reasonably good. I think it's just a little bit of profit booking today that you have seen on the markets.
Now, Avinash, I mean, geopolitical uncertainties that are playing out have helped gold prices. I think in October alone, the gold prices, the spot gold is up about 8% or so. But there was a report coming out today which suggested that gold demand across the globe has in fact dropped by about 6% in the September quarter of this year. Now, given the precarious economic conditions in the market, with Europe possibly slipping into recession, do you expect yellow metal to come under pressure from here on?
No, I think my guess is the gold prices depend on a lot of factors apart from the demand supply. What kind of central bank buying goes into gold, that is also a very critical variable. And there are some challenges in the sense that normally when there are some crises happening, that is the time when gold is used as an asset largely to hedge your risk. So I think, in terms of the upside for gold, that would be limited. And I think clearly, as of now, we don't see any kind of major kind of crisis breakdowns in any part of the globe. So I think apart from the Israel-Hamas war, and most importantly, central banks still have not commented on their buying kind of strategy for gold. I would believe that, you would probably have to wait for a couple of months before we get a clear indication of the yellow metal price, whether it goes up or goes down. Normally during the festive quarter, especially in India, gold prices do rise because of a good amount of demand, in this kind of quarter. But overall, I think in terms of the risk upside, I would still believe that gold is not a productive asset which is going to deliver some outperformance which is far better than the equity market. So I think it's going to be volatile in the near term, but longer term, it's again going to settle down.
Is that one of the reasons why while September demand has been low on the back of the fact that gold prices have been in fact very high owing to festivities here? Are people taking a precarious view of not buying too much of what is too expensive?
Yeah, I think clearly now people have become more smarter. I think instead of buying a gold coin or typically a gold ornament, I think people normally have realized that it's always better to buy an ETF or maybe some sort of a digital asset. That is one change which is happening. And most importantly, when gold prices shoot up, obviously it impacts demand immediately. So I think local demand has also obviously got impacted partially.
Right.
We'll have to see, wait and watch to see the movements.
Sir, I also want to touch on silver prices. Now, at a time of uncertainty, at least in the last 2-3 years, we have seen that, you know, gold or silver prices typically move in the same direction, and silver rather has outperformed in the last 2 to 3 years. But given the kind of uncertainties that we are seeing, especially you know, with the lack of growth, lack of demand coming from China, Europe slipping into recession, and knowing the fact that, you know, silver has a lot of industrial use, do you expect silver to underperform gold?
I think, see, my guess is, you know, silver is rightly, as you mentioned, it's a large percentage of silver is used for industrial purposes. And I think if there is a major slowdown in China or Europe, typically that is definitely going to cut down, you know, demand. And obviously, you know, obviously, if the demand is low, the prices are going to be lower. Gold is always a premium asset, Suyash. So I think silver follows gold. So if there is a correction in gold, obviously, I would not be surprised that silver also would see a further downfall. But at least at the near term, you know, it doesn't look that silver is going to see any panic sell-off. But yes, industrial consumption is a key barometer. If there is some cutback in, you know, global demand for silver from industrial users, then that could impact silver prices negatively.
All right, Avinash, stay with us. Let's also take a quick look at some of the stocks that we are tracking. Let's begin with Bharti Airtel first. Bharti Airtel all set to come up with its Q2 numbers that will be closely eyed by not just telecom operators, but also general public.
Yes, Shweta, a muted quarter is expected, at least that's what the street is anticipating from Bharti Airtel. Revenue is expected to jump about 10% or so on a year-on-year basis, whereas because of delays in tariff hikes, we may see a dip in profitability. Profit, as per analyst estimates, is expected to dip somewhere between 10 to 30%. Now, there are a few, of course, metrics that we closely track, which is the ARPU, average revenue per user. That is expected to jump about, you know, 2% or so on a quarter-on-quarter basis and come in at around 203 to 204 rupees. Subscriber base will also be keenly eyed. How many subscribers did Bharti Airtel added in the September quarter? At least from the street's expectation, I think 4 million to 5 million subscribers are expected to be added. We saw the results from the Africa business of Bharti Airtel. You know, we saw a decline on both revenue and profitability front, but that was not because of operational issues. That was actually because of a depreciation of the Nigerian currency. So overall, a muted quarter is expected, but I mean, I'm looking at the stock also. The stock did end about you know, lower in today's session, but the overall brokerage calls on Bharti Airtel, I mean, there are 3 domestic brokerages that expect the stock to climb above that 1,000 sort of levels, you know, in the next couple of months or so. And in fact, I think Bharti Airtel ended slightly lower today. It was down about 0.88 or 0.9% or so in today's trade, but overall it has been an outperformer this year.
All right, Avinash, not a great result expected there as far as Q2 numbers from Bharti Airtel is concerned. ARPU is not likely to go up as much as expected, and there is going to be a dip in subscriber base as well. With Jio's foray, it appears that the entire telecom sector has been challenged in a way.
I mean, Jio has added 11 million subscribers or so. Bharti is expected to add around what, 4 million subscribers. Jio's ARPU,
the numbers are very skewed.
Yeah, 4%, and Bharti's ARPU is expected to only rise by 2%.
Avinash?
I think my sense is, you know, I think the numbers are definitely going to be, you know, quite, you know, disappointing. But I think what is important is the management commentary on the 5G rollout, any new kind of products which they launch. And I think the market should obviously be looking at the kind of growth in subscriber base, because that is clearly a key indicator. The ARPUs are also expected, I think, probably in the second half to, you know, stabilize or get little better, because a fair amount of, you know, pricing power has again come in the market. But if, you know, Reliance Jio gets more aggressive, then I think it's going to impact the subscriber base of both the players. I mean, Vodafone is a gone case, but if you look at Bharti, any loss in subscriber base would definitely be viewed negatively. So I think we have a hold on the stock. We would look at the commentary, you know, once the numbers come out tomorrow.
All right, numbers expected today. We will, of course, keep tracking those numbers. But before we let you go, Avinash, let's also take a look at some of the top gainers and losers on Dalal Street today.
Now, let's talk about gainers first, Shweta, as always. SBI Life Insurance was a top gainer in today's trade. The stock was up about 3.3% or so. In fact, the stock has extended its rally to 2 sessions now. The overall volumes in the stock was also pretty high. I think, you know, about 20 lakh shares changed hands in today's trade, whereas the 1 week average is of about 10 lakh shares or so. Titan was another stock which was in the green, in fact among the top gainers in the Nifty pack, up about 2.5%. Now the stock overall has been on a bit of a skid this month. However, we are seeing some bit of a reversal taking place in the last 1 week or so. The stock is actually now, after that a muted start to the month, it's actually on a 3-day winning run. And I think the expectation is that, I mean, Titan results are going to come out, I think, on Friday. And it's expected to post a good set of numbers. That's why we are seeing this run up in the stock price. HDFC Life Insurance, another insurance company which featured in the list of top gainers, the stock jumped about 2%, over 2% actually, after it positively surprised the street as far as its September quarter report card is concerned. Net profit for the quarter jumped about 15% on a year-on-year basis. The street was factoring a growth of about 10 to 12% as far as net profit is concerned. The other two stocks among the top gainers was Kotak Mahindra, up about 1.08%, and Asian Paints, which also added 1.08%. Now among losers was Mahindra & Mahindra. Oh, Sun Pharma was a top loser today. Sun Pharma dropped on the back, ahead of its Q2 report card. The numbers are expected to come out anytime soon. Expectation from the street is that US sales could be softer, and that could weigh on the stock prices going forward.
Right.
Also, we are seeing a correction play out in pharma stocks. It was among the top losing sectors today. So perhaps that's also adding to the weakness. Coming to Mahindra & Mahindra, the stock was down about 2% or so. It's the second straight day where the stock is seeing a bit of a dip. Now we are also seeing a broader dip in the auto pack, so perhaps that's why we are also seeing Mahindra & Mahindra taking a beating in today's trade. Eicher Motors, another auto stock which was down today, down about 1.8%. LTI, ONGC were other losers, down about 1.5% in today's trade.
All right, that is as far as top losers and gainers is concerned. Avinash Gorashakar, thank you very much, sir, for taking time out. Thank you for speaking to News9. To you too, Sesh. Thank you for being here today. Moving on now, several politicians, activists and journalists in India have claimed to have received threats of, and I quote, state-sponsored attacks on their Apple devices. Mahua Moitra, Priyanka Chaturvedi, Raghav Chadha are amongst the opposition leaders who took to social media to share alerts they have received on their Apple devices. The alerts are known as Apple's threat notifications. The company says that they are designed to in fact inform and assist users who may have been targeted by state-sponsored attackers. In a response to News9 query, Apple has responded saying, and I quote, Apple does not attribute the threat notification to any specific state-sponsored attacker. Further, in its response, Apple has said that attackers are not average cyber criminals. They are exceptionally resourced and target a very small number of specific individuals and their devices, making these attacks much harder to detect and to prevent. That, of course, on your screens, the clarification News9 has received from Apple. Let me quickly get in my colleagues Rakesh Khar, Karthik Malhotra joining us here in the studio. Elaborate response, Karthik, that you have received from Apple at this point in time leaves us with more questions than answers.
I wouldn't really call it an elaborate response, Shweta. On the contrary, I feel it's a fairly vague, cryptic response with no specifics emerging in terms of, they're saying they can't attribute it to a specific state-sponsored attack. Now, how do you define specific and why is it not specific? So I think Apple should have by now been able to at least identify and report who is the state sponsoring these attacks. So I think again, even the second part of the statement is a little cryptic. The second part of the statement states that perhaps these threats could be improper or incomplete. I mean, if you're issuing a statement like that,
could be false as well.
Could be false as well. So a statement like that pretty much, and it says that these could be false alarms specifically. So, a statement like that confuses you more than clarifies the issue at hand. So to a response to this clarification that we received from Apple, there were a set of another 5 odd questions that we had posted to Apple. We haven't yet received a response. In fact, before receiving this statement, I had made a phone call to Mr. Virat Bhatia, the MD of Apple India, and he did not answer a specific question I'm using the word specific deliberately. He did not answer any specific question and routed me to the PR team at Apple. The PR team has just sent this one little paragraph, which was on your screen sometime back, on its rather vague statement. So I think 4 or 5 questions that emerge, and Rakesh could sort of add to that list. It's a fairly elaborative, comprehensive list. Number one, why hasn't Apple been able to specify which is the state which has sponsored these attacks? Number one. Number two, when is Apple going to be in a position to give a full disclosure on whatever went on today? And there are enough and more ways through which Apple should be able to identify at least the location, email ID, phone number, some sort of an identification on the person or people involved who are trying to maliciously target a certain set of individuals.
Right.
Number three, we also asked Apple, we've seen what happened in the US elections. We've seen how Facebook was under attack and Oxford, Cambridge was, Cambridge Analytica was under attack as well during US elections. We are in election season ourselves, and in a run-up to elections, general elections 2024, how is Apple likely to safeguard itself from any allegations on wrongdoing
or
by way of influencing, any targeted attack? Now, before I hand over to you for further questions and Rakesh for more comments, I think it's also important to note that as my response to these 4 or 5 questions to Apple, there was one link which was sent to me, and in that link there is one line which is fairly relevant, and that is a distinction that Apple is making between state-sponsored attacks and cyber crime and cyber criminals attacking. The distinction between the two being that cyber criminals work at a mass carpet bombing level, whereas the state-sponsored attacks, like you mentioned in your opening statement as well, are on a very, very select few number of individuals and are backed by enormous resources.
And sophisticated technology.
And sophisticated technology. Now, is this enough data with Apple to absolutely conclude that this is state-sponsored attack? And if it is, then I think which state and why are questions that need to emerge now.
Which state agency? Lots of questions. Good to have you back, Rakesh.
Thank you, Shweta.
There is a timeline of event for the benefit of our viewers. Let's break it down. From afternoon onwards today, a whole host of academics, opposition leaders as well as journalists started reporting that they're getting a notification on their Apple mobile phone saying that there is a state-sponsored attack. Somebody's trying to access their personal data. The question obviously was, is it the central government? Is it a specific state? Is it a state agency? Who is the state in this case? Who is the state according to you?
See, Shweta and Karthik, I think fundamentally first and foremost, it's a very, very serious charge. Let's not run away from the fact that it's very, very important that we discuss this and we get to the truth of it. Unfortunately, Apple is not helping us get to the truth of it. I mean, as Karthik rightly pointed out, it is not defining what is state-sponsored, in this case. What defines, what classifies? That was the question Karthik asked them. That's the most important question. How do you define and classify something as state-sponsored, except stating that, it is different from cyber security criminals? I mean, this is as much a criminal act in that sense. Forget about who is doing it. If you don't have specs very clearly defining what is state-sponsored threat in this case, you are actually treading on a very thin line, and these are very, very sensitive definitions. And then they make it worse in this case, unfortunately, by not identifying which state it is. And they put it right at the top of the statement that we are not specifying which state it is. We live in a borderless world, especially in the digital arena. How do you know which state is involved? As I say, and I repeat, it's a very serious issue, needs examination right at the end. But how do you come to that examination?
Right.
And second and foremost issue is that, Shweta, what is the algorithm? How do you know who at the receiving end is actually, being targeted? In terms of your back end, what is the mathematics that you employ to see that do you have all the details? If you know what the person is, then are you communicating to him? And this is not a random message. There should be a lot of thought in understanding, is it a computer auto-generated message? Is it really thought through at the end? Someone has put his mind to it, defining what exactly constitutes raising and writing this message to individuals. And third and foremost, the kind of denial or, in the communication that Karthik just, so to say, articulated, you also articulated. It says it could be false, it says it could not be accurate. Then how do you raise such a serious charge without being truly confident of what you're trying to say? So in its entirety, it has come at a time when we are obviously headed towards general elections, we have state assembly elections. You don't identify who the villain is. You put out a balloon in the air, which has to be, so to say, assessed on its merit, but then it's a broken communication. It's a serious charge accompanied by a very, very broken communication, which lacks trust and confidence in this case.
Right.
We might not have all the details, but they should come up with details as early as possible.
Absolutely. I think, it's also important to note, and this is also one of the questions that I had posted on my list of 5 questions to Apple, that being that it seems fairly evident that most people, if not all people who have received this threat, so to speak, threat notification as Apple calls it, are not part of the sitting government. So I think all the more reason Apple must clarify at the earliest.
There is if not a fair spray, but there is a random, like for instance, Samir Saran of ORF has got it.
Yeah, but not part of the sitting government, and individuals representing ORF.
Neither is government nor is he opposition. So, what is the method? How do they exactly identify these people? So, is there a
researchers,
pattern?
Academics and members of the government, not a part of the sitting ruling
and
government.
we don't know who all could come in this list.
Right.
It's not a definitive
It's an extensive list.
It's an extensive list. It's the first part of it.
Okay.
So, it's even more important that Apple comes clean in its, intent. And we must understand that Apple, in its business landscape with India, has really shown a huge trajectory upwards. And if this kind of communication goes around where questions are raised not just by by any basic journalist or even civil society, it must address those right away. And
in fact, the government has addressed it. IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav has also spoken. We'll play up that bite. But
before
on
that,
his
I
Twitter,
want to raise this issue. There's another very, very important issue. If you have a device which is touted as one of the best technologically powered device for the end consumer, someone has to ensure its safety. And this is not the first time that this has been reported. In 2021, we had 3 or 4 countries facing the similar situation. I would like to be educated by Apple that what happened to that. Did they identify which the state was?
Absolutely.
So is it kite flying? And that too, it's a very serious business. One cannot just run away from the fact.
Let's come back
just
to
in
it.
Apple's defense, before we play that bite, I'm not a spokesperson for Apple, but just in Apple's defense, I think the very fact that these are threat notifications being issued does not necessarily, to my mind, conclude that the devices have actually been breached into. It does not necessarily conclude that data has been compromised. It seems to be more of a warning being triggered either algorithmically or personally by somebody.
One would like to know.
Of course, no doubt Apple should come and tell us how these warnings get triggered. But the fact that it is triggering of a warning as a message and as an email to Apple users where there seems to be a repeated attack to a specific group of people, which it calls state-sponsored in its own definition, and hence, I think difficult to conclude right now if data has thus far been breached, even on those devices and those individuals who have received this threat notification as Apple.
Let's discuss this further. This is like a hot potato. It will be discussed further. Let's quickly play up that reaction from IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav first.
There are many compulsive critics in our country. Their only job is to criticize the government as and when they wake up, as and when they find an opportunity. You must have all seen the advisory issued by Apple. This is a vague advisory. It is based on certain estimations that they have done. Apple has already clarified that their system their encryption system is of highest possible order. They have also clarified and issued a statement saying that this kind of advisory has been issued in 150 countries.
All right, the government, of course, hoping that Apple will work with them to identify who was the attacker, whether it was one state, whether it was a central agency or a state agency. But, look at Apple's... Or an external agency. But look at Apple's response here. And again, not to be in defense of Apple, but Apple says that if we are to tell you how the algorithm works, then the people who are responsible for attack will get further empowered, will know how the algorithm works, and will find a way to work around it, Rakesh.
That's where it's extremely important to see where the probe led to in the earlier episode of such situations being reported by Apple, which involve 4 countries: Uganda, I guess Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. If I'm right about those 4 countries in 2021, it's a serious issue. I keep repeating that we can't dismiss the seriousness of the charge. We must examine it, And for that to happen, it's important that Apple comes with all the relevant details. What is the learning from the earlier episode? How do we address that learning here? And most importantly, you know, how do you make a distinction? The classification of this particular category is so important and so, you know, sensitive that one needs to really define that in public domain. I don't think there's any difficulty in saying that this is, you know, this is the specs for, you know, for identifying a particular state as being, you know, the relevant culprit in this case.
All right, and since Kanishk has joined us, but before we move to him, Karthik, you know, we know that this is a crucial time. 5 state elections are around the corner, starting November. National elections next year. So the timing of this is also a suspect.
Definitely, the timing of it and the individuals who have been targeted is bound to raise questions in the political realms on who that sponsor is of, you know, or who that state is which has perpetrated any sort of unethical behavior in this case. Absolutely. So I think that question is absolutely pertinent. There's no doubt about that.
It's bang on. Actually, we should, as I said, the timing and the question cannot be, you know, questioned in that sense. Okay. But we must really try and get more granular details because having a charge without the backup support in terms of the charge will lead to the kind of questions that we have raised just now.
And just before you head to Kanishk, I think there's also a lot of social media rancor right now on many individuals taking to social media, to platform X and stating that, hey, it's not just India, 150 countries have received threat notifications. Just reading between the lines from the Apple statement, where that Apple statement actually ended with exactly this statement, reading between the lines that it doesn't mention anywhere that 150 such countries have received threat notifications today. I think ever since the start of the threat notification service in 2021, if I'm not mistaken,
Karthik, if
a
the
total of
problem is
150
even in one
countries
country,
have
and if
received.
it's a genuine problem, it's a genuine problem.
Absolutely. Just clarifying that 150
Absolutely.
countries, which even Minister Ashwini Vaishnav did allude to, I think it is not specifically 150 countries and
in a
residents
month
of that
or
country
in a year,
have received it today or last week
I
or
would
last
say
month
even
or
if
last
one
year.
country is involved, it's worth the examination.
One country definitely is involved, as we know, which is India.
Let's quickly get in Kanishk Gaur, CEO, India Future Foundation, joining us here on the show. Kanishk, thank you for taking time out. One of the questions that, you know, I think we're all dealing with is, does these statements or threats mean that there was actually a breach of data? Doesn't look like we have Kanishk at this point. You know, I think going back to what you were saying and alluding to that statement on whether these threats actually mean that data for these individuals involved has been compromised in one way or the other, that has not been ascertained, Karthik.
Not yet, at least. I mean, it hasn't appeared anywhere in by way of disclosure, either by Apple or by those who have received this threat notification, that data has actually been lost. I don't think people are getting threatened yet or getting ransom calls yet on, you know, on what can be done with that data.
Absolutely. Kanishk is back. Let's get Kanishk. Kanishk, hi. I hope you can listen to us. Thank you for taking time out. I think going back to the question, can we be sure at this point, can we say for a fact that the data for these individuals has been compromised or not compromised? Because that information is not out yet.
See, since Apple has received this alert, they have already issued an advisory. Don't think so that it has got.
Yeah, we did.
All right, doesn't look like we're able to get through to Kanishk, but you're right, there is no information, you know, stating affirmatively what happened to the data of these individuals who've been given that notice or served that threat notification. You know, it is a serious charge, one that central government will also have to investigate, raises a lot of questions. As I said, the timing of this is very sensitive and critical. We don't know which agencies are involved. What is the expectation here?
I think, you know, the expectation is that I think Ashwini Vaishnav has asked Apple to join the investigation. So in that sense, I think the government is keen to take it to the logical end, and Apple should join the investigation and go beyond this banal statement, if I can call that. You know, they'll have to really get specific, if not in the public domain, at least with the concerned authority, so that confidence and trust of each and everyone involved is restored. And also importantly, forget about state being involved, which country being involved. Cybersecurity is a real threat in this country. And, you know, globally, you know, entrenched interests are using it as a weapon of not mass destruction, but, you know, debilitating economic entities, economic assets, because this is a part of the truly modern warfare. So in that sense, I'm happy that they're making a difference between the two in terms of the seriousness of the charge. But cyber criminals being active on your phone is no less menacing.
But again, I think the distinction here being, are these cyber criminals, or is this
I
a
was
little
thinking
more organized in that sense
No, but they're
than
pretty organized.
cybercrime?
We have seen the Jantaras of the world, they're far more organized. I'm saying that in that sense, since we don't have full details on the issue, it's important also to align it with the larger debate on cybersecurity, from where it emanates. And cybersecurity is not now a preoccupation of few criminals who are tech savvy or vice versa. It is a global phenomenon.
Absolutely.
And there are interests being attacked because it is seen as a link to economic growth or debilitating economic growth. So in that sense, Apple raising a flag is, I think, very, very important. Bringing in the state as an active factor, which state we don't know, that takes the debate to another level. And the opposition being right, fairly enough. Okay. They have reasons to ask questions, and answers must come forthwith, with Apple also playing an active partner.
Where does the buck stop in this case, Rakesh? If I can just ask you, does the buck really stop with Apple and Apple alone? Does it stop with Apple India to begin with? Because I don't think much of the coding and much of the writing of algorithms would be happening in India. I think it would be the parent company in the US.
I think,
so does it stop at Apple? Does it stop at the government of India? Or is there some other body globally which should step into, understand and investigate this matter to arrive at a very, very unbiased, believable narrative on, or objectifying, where the breach would have really happened?
So that's why I was very keen to know what has happened after 21 episode happened. Is there any learning? I don't think that's in public domain from Apple's side or from those three countries. I was trying to do a little quick research. I couldn't find any. Maybe I was short on time. But the fact of the matter is that the biggest pointer in this case is what happened in 2021. Have there been any more attacks, including those 150 countries? What is the time period? What was the series of sensitivity? Was it profile oriented in terms of attacking a particular set of people, or was it generic? So in that sense, these are very, very fundamental questions that need to be raised. To answer your question specifically, Karthik, I don't think, it has to be a collective responsibility, where Government of India just can't say that, because ultimately...
But the buck has to stop somewhere, sir. Somebody has to take ownership, and somebody has to put a stamp on the authenticity of whatever the reports find eventually.
To put Apple in the larger context, they have a great story going in India in the business front. I think it will be in their interest to try and explain things in the right perspective. If they don't do so, they could be seen by suspicion on all sides of the divide.
Absolutely. Let's touch base on this story once again tomorrow morning. Hopefully we'll have more details by then, but we've run out of time on this show. Here's what we know so far. Certain individuals, specifically from opposition, academia, as well as journalism community, have been targeted. What Apple is calling it a state-sponsored attack. We don't know which state, we don't know what agency. Need therefore for a coordinated attempt between the government as well as Apple to figure out the details of this attack. But that's all we have on this show. Thank you very much for watching.
Literally every major power in the world is gearing up